Have a lot more folks registered for this webinar than are on at the moment live, but I know that a lot of people register with the intention of watching the recording because they can't make it live. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and if more people join us, then we'll welcome them to do so, and they can go back and watch whatever they missed. After the fact, everyone will get a recording. And Renee was at the Accessible Yoga Conference. Great. That was pretty amazing weekend. Okay, so just a bit of orientation here to the webinar software. There's a chat box over to the right. Krista, our magician, is moderating that chat, so you might see her chime in and respond. She's also intimately familiar with this topic and might chime in on audio from time to time as well. So please use that chat box as your way to communicate with us, and we'll try to address any questions that come up there. And if you feel as though your questions weren't adequately addressed during the course of the webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us after the fact, and you'll certainly have all the information you need in order to do that. And in fact, we hope that you'll stay in touch one way or another regardless. So it is my pleasure and delight to be speaking today with Lorena Lues. Lorena and I met in 2014 when she was a student in one of my courses at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. That university has been at the cutting edge of integrative health programs, really since its founding many decades ago. And two of the programs that are really relevant to our conversation today are health coaching and yoga therapy, both of which are very familiar for Lorena. She is a health and wellness coach. She is a yoga teacher trained in the Kripalu tradition, and she has done some really extraordinary work at the intersection between integrative health and conventional medicine. And I know that some of our listeners, viewers from the Yoga for Arthritis community are not trained in research, but are really interested in ways that they might be able to get involved in research. And Lorena, you have some experience with that as well, so maybe we'll even get there. But the main reason why I invited Lorena to come talk with us today is because she is a lupus thriver. She's been living with lupus for over 20 years and has used the tools of yoga to help with her own experience with lupus and also for others who have had similar experiences. So I know we have an intersection here of some people from the Yoga for Arthritis community who are much more familiar with rheumatoid arthritis than they are with lupus. So we'll get into just a little bit of lupus background. And I know we also have some folks on the webinar here who have a lot of experience with lupus and might be more interested in what yoga has to do with it. So we'll be sure to go there too. So Lorena, let's just start with, tell me a little bit about your lupus journey. What happened? When did you first notice symptoms? When did you get diagnosed? And, how did you get to a point where your lupus was well managed?
Okay. So I went between the ages of 14 to 16. I was doing a lot of going back and forth to the doctors. And I was going mostly for pain. I was having a lot of pain in just very random places in my body. So my hands were hurting. My right knee all of a sudden started hurting. An ankle, like things that were just for no reason. I hadn't hurt myself in school. It was just very strange. One of my doctors did some testing. And let me just add that I have a grandmother and my mother who also have lupus.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't something unfamiliar to you.
It was unfamiliar to me in spite of that, believe it or not.
Oh, interesting. But certainly your mother probably had an awareness that this was possible.
Sure. Absolutely.
And what to look for. Which,
yeah.
not everybody who gets these kinds of symptoms as a child has that kind of familiarity, even to know that rheumatology is a place to go for a consult, right? You start going to your pediatrician for pain, and it can take a while for that one of those diagnoses to even be on the radar.
Yeah, and it did. And I spent about 3 years, no more than that, about 4 years of in pain, low energy, rashes, just the feeling of not being well. I knew something was wrong. And then one of the doctors diagnosed me like with juvenile arthritis or something like that. I did have an ANA test positive, which is one of the indicators for possibly for lupus. And, he didn't know a lot about lupus, so he didn't, do any further testing in that area. So anyway.
Did he know that your mother had lupus?
He did.
So I'll just say, genetics do not dictate your destiny, but genetics certainly play a role in your risks. And especially for, really all of the diseases in this umbrella category. So there are over 100 different diseases that are considered in the arthritis umbrella. And they all have some sort of a genetic predisposition involved. So if they run in your family, you're more likely to have them. So I'm surprised that with all of this lupus in the family line, that wasn't something that was being discussed earlier. But I'll also say that, for all of these rheumatic diseases, diagnosing them is really complicated. And, everyone is just a little bit different in how they show up. And so when you say that, well, you had high ANA, but, high ANA could mean a lot of things.
Right.
And even there are people who have, there's rheumatoid factor that can be measured, but some people are negative for rheumatoid factor and they still have rheumatoid arthritis. So it's not surprising that they, and Krista can speak to this, who's also on the line, that, you can move from one box to another over the course of your life with one of these diseases, because the boxes are really imperfect and they're just our best attempt to try to, diagnose and treat a condition that's really, expressed so differently from one person to another. So you were originally diagnosed with what's now called JIA, juvenile inflammatory arthritis, but back then was probably called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
And then what happened? How did it change?
So I graduated high school, and I was still having just an array of symptoms. Lupus is the great imitator, they call it, because it mimics so many other conditions. And I got tested for various things. They thought to test me for lupus yet. And I started my first year in college, and that's when just things got completely out of control. I started having to sleep probably over 14 hours to just function the next day.
Fatigue is such a critical symptom.
It was just beyond. And then, and the pain got so bad that I couldn't even brush my teeth because I couldn't bend my fingers. They were swollen, red. And then the most dangerous component for me was that I started having, showing some signs of kidney involvement.
Oh, okay. So how did they pick up on that?
Well, I picked up some things. I noticed at first that a doctor still hadn't diagnosed.
Were you still a teenager at this point?
I was 18.
Okay.
I was 18. My ankles started swelling really bad. Started getting a lot of migraine headaches, a lot of nausea. And then one day I just went to use the bathroom and there was blood in my urine.
Mm.
And so my parents were like, well, maybe we should go to a rheumatologist. Yeah. So once I got to the rheumatologist, which he's still my rheumatologist to this day, and we have a great working relationship together.
And that's so important.
Yes. He just immediately, he did the test, and I think he knew that day because he mentioned it.
Yeah.
It was so obvious at that point. Anybody could have picked it up at that point. And then they diagnosed me with lupus nephritis. Right.
So can you say a little bit? So let's just start with lupus.
Yes.
So lupus is one of these complicated conditions where there isn't one test for it, right? So in order to decide that you have lupus, you have to actually have a number of different characteristics that are part of lupus that not everybody has. So, one of them might be the rash. Not everybody has the rash. One of them might be joint pain. Not everybody has the joint pain. So what specifically is lupus nephritis?
So lupus nephritis is an inflammation of the kidney, where because the disease activity has damaged the organ so much, the nephrons, which filter blood and protein and things like that, begin to have scarring in them, and then nutrients and blood can leak through that. As within a healthy person, you wouldn't have that. It would just, the right things would stay in, the right things would go out.
Right.
And then, if that continues, that can, it can drive towards dialysis, and you're just losing complete kidney function, which I never got to the dialysis component, gratefully, but I was almost there. I was losing kidney function dramatically for a long time.
And let's just remind everybody, what did the kidneys do?
The kidneys cleanse the waste in the body. They filter your blood. They're incredibly important for getting rid of toxins.
Right.
So it's essential. And with lupus, we don't know why, but kidneys are often affected in a lot of people. I don't know the specific percentage, but it's pretty high in terms of the organ that's usually attacked, so it's very interesting why. It'd be great for some research to go on about that as to why the kidney, and it's never one. It's always both.
Right. So lupus is an autoimmune disease, which means that the immune system is a little confused about what is part of the body that should be preserved and what is foreign and should be gotten rid of as a waste product. And so for those who are familiar with rheumatoid arthritis, that's when the immune system is attacking the connective tissue of the joints. Exactly. And that also can be true in lupus. And in fact, many people have lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, but other organs can be involved. And depending on which organ systems are being attacked, the diagnosis might be slightly different. But really, your immune system can get confused regarding any kind of tissue in the body. And so for lupus nephritis, it happens to be the kidneys, but also that wasn't your only issue, because you were also saying that you had a lot of pain.
A ton of pain, headaches, nausea. And I don't know if that was related to the kidney, dysfunction, who knows, but I was feeling pretty unwell, and they hospitalized me as soon as they found out that I was losing the kidney function, to begin to try to get the inflammation under control, so there wouldn't be further damage going on. With the goal was to preserve the kidney. Obviously, I was only 18, and we were hoping that those kidneys would sustain a long life, and gratefully they have. But it was a very scary time for me. So what was the turning point? How did you get from that
to a point where, obviously today you're thriving, but there was a certain point where something shifted toward wellness. And I don't just mean, obviously at that point you got drugs that would modulate your immune system and anti-inflammatories, and that certainly sent you on the road to recovery. But at what point did you really start to thrive?
I started to thrive when I started to implement ongoing, consistent healing practices. And what I mean by that, I began to tap into some things that were more holistic. So acupuncture, yoga, watching a lot of what I was eating. Before that, I had no concept of what should I be eating? What's healthy? What's unhealthy for my body?
And how old were you when all of that started?
I started really looking at those things. I started looking at yoga within a couple of years of being diagnosed.
Okay, so let's go there for a little bit. How did you find yoga?
I knew what yoga was, obviously, and I always, connected yoga to stress, and I knew that. And I was told that to keep my stress levels down, because that would definitely, dysregulate my immune system and create a lot of havoc, and bring me into flare-ups. So I said, well, this looks like something that I could use for stress, little did I know that it was going to do way
It was going to change your life and become part of your profession.
Yeah, but I had no idea.
What was your first experience? Did you go to a yoga class?
I did. I went to a yoga studio. I went to a yoga studio, and after work, and I went in there, and you know, and I was still in a lot of pain, and I came out just feeling so much better.
Okay.
And
so you had a positive, because not everybody has a positive experience with their first yoga class, because sometimes somebody who's going into a yoga class in pain chooses a class that, you know, is not a good fit, and they end up struggling, not just physically, but also psychologically with issues like, I can't do this. What's wrong with me? Is it supposed to hurt? So you're fortunate that you had a positive experience with that first class.
And I've been in those classes where I'm like, is this a torture or something?
Right.
And I think I got very lucky. Well, number one, I chose a beginner class, but I think I got very lucky with the teacher that I had. And she asked, does anybody have any conditions that they're working through? Is there anybody, having a certain injury? So I raised my hand, and not everybody will do that, obviously, but I raised my hand. Yeah,
let's actually stop there for a second, because that's really important I know we have a lot of yoga teachers and yoga therapists watching this. And yes, while asking at the beginning of class, does anybody have anything that I need to be aware of, is helpful, it also requires that people speak up, and it requires that they reveal confidential health information about themselves to a group of strangers. Yes. So as much as possible, if you as a yoga teacher or therapist can take an opportunity to speak with each person before the class begins, just, walk around the room, whisper in their ear. There's even a little trick that we have used we have a drop-in class in New York, Yoga for Arthritis and Chronic Pain. And sometimes even asking people to close their eyes and go within and pay attention to their body, create a little warmth and heat in their hands, and then bring their hands to any place in the body that needs a little bit of attention or love. And then as a teacher, you can look around the room and notice where people put their hands. At least it gives you an indicator of what body parts I need to be aware of. But ideally, you really get like a private moment with each student. So fortunately, you felt comfortable speaking up and saying, hey, over here. And then you got a little bit of personal attention, or you felt permission to do things a little differently for yourself?
The teacher gave a lot of permission, which I think it's really important for us. So I'll never forget, and it made me feel so good. She kept saying, this is your practice. Wherever you are is where you're supposed to be right now. Take your time. If something doesn't feel good, don't do it. This is very flexible. So I love that aspect about it. So it gave me a moment to just be like, okay, before that I had been very active, and all of a sudden I'm having all these issues and all this pain. And it just gave me a lot of, it gave me kind of a moment of self-acceptance. I was like, okay, I can work with this. And she kept saying, today is today, tomorrow might be different. Everybody's different days. So all those things.
And that's so much more amplified in autoimmune diseases. So, normal people have like these kind of highs and lows, and, people with lupus have, right, exactly. Yeah. So you really have to take that to heart, that like, I might wake up tomorrow and feel much better or much worse. And what am I going to do with that? And that really gets into the philosophy of yoga. So I'm sure you started out mostly with the asana practice.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what happened in your journey? When did yoga become a tool for really managing your lupus?
Steph, that last question you just asked up a little bit.
Oh, okay. I'll say that again. So, right. So you went in there to help manage your stress. Yes. Because you knew that yoga could help with stress, and you also knew that stress has a big impact on lupus. Yes. So, but at this point, maybe you're also adding in acupuncture. You're doing some other things too. So, so talk a little bit about the journey of managing your lupus through yoga and these other modalities.
So I was doing, of course, I was doing acupuncture, and I was starting to take a look at, what I was eating, and, began to read about anti-inflammatory foods and foods that nourish my body. And I'll be honest with you, I tried a lot of those foods and they weren't for me. I didn't like them, or so it was a long time before I started
Yeah, I see a lot of this anti-inflammatory diet type of thing. And you do a lot with diet with your health coaching, right? Yes. And, it's so important that, I like to tell people you're the world's leading expert of your own body. Yes. What's an anti-inflammatory diet for one person is not for another person. And especially for these diseases, you can have trigger foods, right? Right. So did you start to notice what foods had an effect on your symptoms?
So because of yoga, I began to get a greater sense of like self-awareness, stopping and just kind of closing my eyes and not just going about my day, but like checking in on how I felt after I ate something, or how I felt when, I worked 9 hours instead of 6, or how I felt when I was around even certain people.
Right. Yeah.
So I started to it gave me that kind of like slow down, connect, go inward and see what you're feeling physically and emotionally. And so when I would eat certain things, I would almost start to like see like, okay, I ate that and not so good of a response, or don't feel so good, or I eat this and now I feel more energized, and my digestive system really likes this, or, I started to really.
Yeah. And this is Svadhyaya. This is self-study, right? It's like, paying attention to your own experience and learning how. Now, did you do this formally? Did you keep any sort of journal, or you just sort of took mental notes and became more aware?
I did both. I worked with a health coach, for a while, and I still here and there will work with her. I did all those things that I suggest other people to do. So I created a team, where I would go to yoga, where I would have my acupuncturist. I had my MD. I had, somebody that was kind of guiding me with the nutrition, with the process of nutrition, support system. So I created like a little team for myself to, when I needed this, I'd go here. When I needed that, I would go there.
How did you find the right people for that team? Did you sometimes go to somebody and think, oh, this is not a good fit at all, I need to keep shopping?
Correct. Yes. Many times. I would go to, I had a health coach that, that said to me, well, are you planning on getting off your medications? That was one of her first questions. And I just looked at her like, okay, I feel completely judged right now.
Yeah.
And
that's so Lorena, what's the answer? Do you plan to get off of your medications?
Well, the answer is to not ask that question because
because first of all, you can't even plan for that, right?
And we have to stay within our scope of practice.
Yeah.
The yoga teacher, that's really not your scope of practice. That's MD's scope of practice. So my answer was in that moment, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. And because of yoga, I'm okay with not knowing and figuring out as I continue.
Yeah.
So,
I would say that's not necessarily a goal. It might be a consequence. And especially with the fluctuations that the disease goes through, even if it's a reality for a period of time, it's not necessarily it's not like, oh, one day you don't need medication anymore and then that's it.
I love that you're saying that. I love that you're saying that because with an autoimmune condition like this, there's no arrival. It's a chronic disease. So, there's the healing component of it, the healing versus the curing. There's that healing place where you begin to, accept things more and you find a way to have like a new normal. But, who's to know that I'm not going to go through a cycle for no reason? I could be doing everything perfect. Right. I could be doing yoga every day and eating the perfect diet and something could happen. The environment, a period of like a stress that I didn't create that just happens with life.
Or that you did because we're not perfect. And so, even if you can attribute your flare to a choice you made, it's not helpful. It's not helpful to blame it on yourself. It's not helpful to blame it on anybody else. So now you mentioned new normal, and that's probably a concept that's familiar to a lot of people here. But what does new normal mean to you?
So new normal for me means that I'm living with the day-to-day symptoms, and I'm living with the reality of my new life, which is having a diagnosis that has possibilities, and still being able to, be joyful and be, going to work or doing the things that I desire to do. It's more of I think acceptance is what comes up a lot in my heart when you ask that question, is just accepting that this is what it is right now, and not attaching all this like drama and fear and anxiety, and but more of like, okay, let's just go day to day and see how things evolve.
So do you think that that's Santosha, contentment with whatever is? So, and what are your day-to-day symptoms? So now that you are in a pretty stable place in your disease, how is it still different from your old normal?
Yeah. My most challenging symptoms are fatigue. So fatigue is one of my most challenging symptoms. I still get rashes out of nowhere with no reason. And my kidneys continue to be monitored very closely, and they have been these past 22 years. So I still fluctuate because those kidneys were damaged. So I still fluctuate in where I've never lost function again, but they're not normal right, quote unquote, they're not the normal kidney. So there is some abnormalities in the tissues. There's scarring there, and I still have to really stay on top of checking. And I get blood work every 3 months. Like, there's still all these things that, sometimes can be annoying because you have to go to work. Now you have to make time to go to the doctor, and you have all these things. So my greatest challenge is honestly is having to balance my life in a way that I can still do all the exciting things that I want to do, like work with people and create my yoga video and go to school for my, and still rest and still take care of myself, make myself a priority.
So let's go there. That's brahmacharya, right? Yes. Conservation of energy, right? Yes. Use of energy. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what you do to, what you do with your daily choices and how you sort of modulate your energy, because fatigue is probably the most challenging symptom for many people with lupus. It is, and with rheumatoid arthritis too. So how do you manage that?
So it's very different on what I will do each day. So some days I have fatigue where, I'm working my 8-hour day and it'll just come out of nowhere. So I will go to my car and take a 30-minute nap. I will just stop everything, go to my car. I have a little blanket in there, my little pillow, and I'll just take a nap. And that 30-minute nap can give me some energy to continue for the rest of the day. Some days I have to leave work. So if it gets too bad where I'm just like having a really difficult time, I'm not going to push it. If I'm tired, I need to go home. So I talk to my supervisors, and they know I'm going to get the work done because they trust me at this point. So I go home and I just rest. I'm very selective in the activities that I choose to do these days. So I don't sign up for a bunch of stuff anymore. I used to it took me a while to get here, but I used to just sign up for never ending stuff. And, I'm going to go to lunch with this person and I'm going to do this and that. So now I'm a little bit more selective and realistic. And knowing that you can still do everything, but just not at once.
Right. Yeah.
You can still do everything.
And you really don't have to do everything.
You don't have to do it. Correct.
I think that these kinds of conditions sort of force you to make important choices that really we should all be making about, deliberate choices of what do I really want my life to be made up of? What do I want to be doing with this precious time that I have? And only because you recognize that your energy is scarce. Yeah. And, you really need to be more selective, but we should all be more selective and get activities and people out of our lives that are not serving our highest good.
I agree so much. And that's one of the benefits, or one of the blessings of having this, is that I've observed, is that I'm much more mindful about my daily choices, much more mindful about what I'm choosing to do, what I'm putting in my body. making sure that I do take time to go to the acupuncture because I know that makes me feel better. And I know that's so that's one of the blessings, that it makes you a little bit more, mindful about everything that you're doing.
And so you said that your supervisors trust you because they know that you're going to get the work done. Have there ever been times that you can't?
Yeah, there have. I mean, there's been times that stuff has been late, that I've gotten stuff in and it's been late. And I work in mental health, and in mental health, there's like never ending documentation. It's very busy. I work with a very needy population. I mean, it's intense. And sometimes I've had to, and that's very difficult for a type A personality that wants, the number one in the Enneagram, like just perfection. But sometimes that's what's had to happen. And it's very challenging for my personality to be able to go there. But sometimes the fatigue is so intense that there's just not another choice.
And in those situations, I just started getting an echo. Are other people hearing that?
I don't hear an echo, Steph, at all.
Okay. So in those situations, did the world end? I mean, obviously I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but
absolutely not.
I think that's so important to remember.
I thought it might end because of the way that my personality is constructed. Right. But no, and nobody got fired, and so and in some moments I've got more help because of those.
Oh, and I love this. So sometimes in yoga classes with people who have chronic pain or arthritis, we talk about the props as a metaphor for using available support, for making you, if you have a bolster, lean into that bolster, allow yourself to be held. Right. So I think that's because there's a reluctance to do that. There's a reluctance to rely on other people. And the truth is we are social beings that have evolved in tribes because we need each other.
There is. And I think we're, sorry, I have you getting stuck a little bit, and then I have you talking. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm not.
Okay. Go ahead, Lorena. Finish your thought.
I was thinking of, that's kind of how, our world is nowadays, though. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing where, some people don't even know their neighbors. And, it's just kind of like we're all in these little boxes every day. So it's also helped me to be like, hey, neighbor, because I just adopted a puppy, can you walk my dog today? Or do you mind? And they're like, sure. Like nobody's ever said like, absolutely not. I'm not helping you. Forget it.
And even if they did, what was the harm in asking?
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about your yoga practice. Okay. So how do you modify your yoga practice for your lupus?
I modify it. Sometimes even so my body can have some days where like certain areas a little bit tighter than others. I don't know if that's inflammation or whatever the case might be. So I use a lot of props. I love props. Depending on what I need, some days I might need 2 blocks. Some days I need 1 block. Some days I don't need a block. So I use the blocks as necessary, the blankets. So I use lots and lots of props, shorter spans. So sometimes I'll break a practice out. So I'll do like. So
you practice mostly at home? By yourself?
Mostly at home. Yeah, mostly at home. I really enjoy that nowadays. And then when I want to have the community aspect, I'll go to a yoga class.
Right.
But lately, it's been more, for me, it's just because of my schedule currently, it's just been a little bit more effective for me to do it at home. And so depending on my energy level, I might shorten the practice.
Sure.
Some days I might feel really like energized. So I do like a more rigorous practice and pick videos that I like that tap into that. And some days I might just do Shavasana for 15 minutes and just breathe.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, what about the non-asana practices? So what kinds of breath do you use?
I love Nadi Shodhana. So that's the alternate nostril breathing. Of course, the Dirga breath, the belly breath.
What do you like about alternate nostril breath?
I feel very grounded after alternate breath. I just feel like really, really grounded and centered and clear. very like clear in my mind. One of the things that we haven't talked about is the lupus fog, which is one of the things that happen with lupus, where you just feel like you're forgetting things, you feel kind of cloudy in your mind, as if there was a kind of a cloud taken over.
And that can happen in fibromyalgia as well. So for people who are more familiar with that.
And the alternate nostril breathing really helps me with that, because something about it just really centers me and clears me tremendously. And then the Dirga breath, the belly breath, believe it or not, it's a very energizing breath for me. I know that's not the intention. The intention is the relaxation response, but maybe the fact that it creates that relaxation in my body, it gives more room for energy to maybe move upwards. So that's a very relaxing and energizing breath for me. It also helps me sleep. So I like those two for that reason. Like the nights that I can't sleep or too much is on my mind, and I know that sleep is just the most important thing for me in terms of my disease management. I tap into that belly breath, and laying down is just one of the most glorious ways to do that breath. Because your belly is just kind of relaxed, and there's no obstructions, or you're just and I fall right asleep. I mean, before I'm finished doing the time that I set myself out to do, I fall right asleep. So that's why I like those two breaths.
And do you meditate? Do you chant? Do you, are there any other?
I love chanting. It's the meditation and the chanting. I'm not doing as consistent as the deep breathing. Of course, when you're breathing, it's a form of meditation in many ways, because you're focused on that, So, but formal meditation and chanting practices, I'm not doing every day nowadays. But I do them sometimes. Like I'm like, I feel like chanting, and then I'll just do it, Or I really need some meditation today, and then I'll just sit and do it. Like after a busy day, I might just tap into it. I use yoga as pulling kind of like what I need for the day. And I have all these tools with yoga.
So it's not always something that you do for, 30 minutes or whatever on your mat. There are little pieces of it that you incorporate throughout your day.
No.
Can you give us some more examples of things that you might do just in your day?
Yeah, absolutely. I also, this is not yoga related, but I also like to walk. I think that's
a walking meditation is, right? Or just being in nature and finding that connection.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I go like on mindful walks. I work in the Charles Street area, and there's this beautiful trees, and there's all this gorgeous architecture. So I walk sometimes during a pretty spring day or in the fall. I also, I tend to, one of the things that probably the most powerful really out of everything that I do is I do lots of checking in with myself mentally. So what I mean by that is, like, throughout the day, I check in to see what I'm thinking about as it relates to me physically. Like sometimes when I don't feel good, I can get very wrapped up in the drama of that. Like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? Am I going into a flare up? Blah, blah, blah. Like all this, like, doing what the mind is supposed to do, giving me all that chatter. So I check in with my thoughts to see, like, what am I thinking about? Is this necessary? Is this constructive? Is this rational? So lots of like working with my thoughts. And I believe that has been monumental really in my healing and continuing to stay well, because I catch myself, not all the time, of course, but I catch myself often to be like, okay, why am I driving myself to get into that, aroused, intense, anxious place where my nervous system can be like activated, and then like that affects your immune system, and then like why am I doing all that? Just stop.
The cessation of the fluctuations of the mind is yoga, right?
So I do a lot
but you have to notice it first in order to.
And I'm not always great at that. I'm like, my gosh, how did I even go
there?
Well,
it's a practice.
Yes. Like, how did I get there? I like that. I've been way down the road. Like
I wasn't paying attention. Right. I was asleep at the wheel.
Yes.
So, with regard to that, I mean, obviously your own personal experience gives you a lot of insight when working with clients or students who have similar kinds of challenges. But what what's difficult about being a wellness professional who has a chronic disease? Because I know a lot of folks, watching this are in that boat.
For me, I think one of the challenges is staying present in what people are telling me without using my own experiences so much.
Not projecting.
This is what you need because it worked for me.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's
huge for me. So I'm always kind of like, okay, no, this is, and if people ask me, then I share, yes, this is, what I've tried, but it's never like, oh, do this because it's worked for me. So you'll definitely be able to get better from it. So that's difficult. Sometimes when I have my private clients, they want to ask a lot of information about my journey. And I'd like to share the information. I'm very vocal about it. I mean, I speak in the community all the time, but I also want that time to be for them.
About their journey. Right.
So there's like such a balance there where you can kind of give a little bit, but then also, well, what about, going back to them?
Right.
Those two things are challenging for me. Also, sometimes there's the assumption that because you're doing well and you're a wellness practitioner is that you're great, you're perfect. There's no issues. You're right. You've arrived. You've arrived.
Well, and some of the challenges of lupus are not visible. You look fine, you look vibrant and healthy, and you might not feel that way.
Yes, that's definitely very challenging as well. Not just in working with people, but in the community. That's been really difficult for me. Just as I've lived with this condition for so long, that people are like, "Well, you look so good," like those. Oh, but you look so great.
Yes, you do, but.
Like, well, thank you, but
Okay, so Lorena, there are two questions that I want to make sure that I ask because I think that that they're really important for the people on the line. So, one, for people who have lupus, who are interested in yoga but might not be practicing yet, what recommendations do you have?
I recommend. My top recommendation would be to work with someone one-on-one. So, a yoga therapist is what that's my top recommendation. If that's accessible for that person, which nowadays there's yoga therapists,
right. At least in the beginning to get started, right?
Yeah. I just really recommend that, you'll have the individualization, you'll have that one-on-one time where it's all for you. And then you can learn with that yoga therapist what kind of practices you want to do or what works best. And the relationship too that you create with that person could be very healing as well. That those interactions on a one-on-one basis. So that would be my top one. If that's not accessible, going to a some of the yoga studios do have what they call therapeutic yoga.
Right.
Nowadays, gentle yoga, beginner's yoga, and when you go to those classes, I know that not everybody feels comfortable sharing, but even maybe pulling up the teacher in the beginning and just saying, hey,
go early.
Yeah, go early and arrive and let the teacher know, what you're working on. And like, this is my first class. And, the other thing could be, that just kind of came into my mind is that there's workshops a lot of times in the community for chronic conditions in the studios. So you can do searching and, and different workshops that they might have available that will be, individualized to your needs. But the one-on-one is probably like,
I would just caution, in terms of a beginner class, there is a wide range, of beginner classes, and some beginner classes even are very intense, depending on the style. Right? So you have to do your homework.
Yeah, very much so. I agree. And the last thing I'll say about that is, as a beginner in yoga with a condition like lupus, go in there just curious. Don't go in there, with any expectations. I would just recommend go in there just really curious about it. maybe watch a video on YouTube about it previously to kind of see what a beginner's class looks like. And, just take your time and do what
and
you can.
Honor your own experience, right?
Yeah, and you know what? I know some classes that I walked into, I kind of just laid in the mat most of the time and just was part of.
Don't be afraid to do that. Yeah.
Sometimes I had in my mind something I was going to do, but then when I got there, I was like, man, what a day. And I just laid there and I was like, this is phenomenal. And if the teacher that's teaching, she'll say, enjoy,
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Okay. So then for our yoga teachers and yoga therapists, who are watching, what recommendations do you have, when they have somebody with lupus who comes into their class or a client with lupus? What are unique considerations related to lupus? Obviously every person's experience is different, but
of course. I'd say, number one, stay in your scope of practice. So
Great.
Be really aware of your own judgments and projections about what someone with a chronic condition should be doing and should not be doing. As my experience with that one teacher that was like, hey, when are you thinking about getting off your medication? Speaking of medications, consider what medications your clients might be on. This is more, I guess, on a one-on-one basis, but even in a class, you can mention, if you're on this kind of medication, and there's some dizziness, be careful with this pose or whatever. You can make those statements, but if you're working with someone on a one-on-one basis, find out what medications they're on because,
what the side effects are.
They are side effects of nausea or maybe, dizziness and things like that. For the one-on-one practitioners, I think a good idea is to speak to the person's doctor.
Right. If that's possible. Not all doctors will be responsive.
Yes.
But in a best case scenario.
Ideally, I think some doctors even appreciate you sending them a letter. Hey, this is what we plan on doing. Let me know if there's any issues with this, or sending them a pamphlet about what, yoga therapy is or yoga is or whatever, just to give them information about you. That could also create some relationship in terms of referrals.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great point.
When a doctor sees that you have that much investment, in the client and their patient, it's like, okay, this person, is really invested.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Mm-hmm. And then I think, if when you take the time to read about lupus, don't make the assumption that that person is coming in there with fatigue. Ask about the symptoms. What is your experience like living with this condition? Yeah. That's all, so you can really get to know the person. Like, what is your experience? Don't ever make an assumption. This person could have, joint pain and fatigue, and this other person could be on dialysis.
Right. Yeah.
So, because it's such a, varied condition, just make no assumptions, which we're taught to do anyway with anyone we're working with. But I think it's especially important with someone who has a chronic health condition like lupus.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what resources do you recommend for somebody who wants to learn more about lupus? I know you have a book coming out. So
I have a yoga for lupus video coming out.
Oh, great. Can you tell us more about both of those?
Yeah. So the book is sharing my journey. So it's going to be a lot of some of the stuff we talked about today, and it'll have worksheets in there of things to contemplate. This book is for people that have lupus. But I think that, a practitioner that's trying to learn more about lupus and the experience of a patient that's living with lupus, it would also be great for them. Right. The book it's yoga for, the video is yoga for lupus. So it's 5 sections on different practices for lupus. So there's a section on pranayama. There's some philosophy, some yoga philosophy. There's strength building. There's some balancing. There's a balancing section. So, and there's some relaxation. So there's different sections that the client can click on. It's not like a practice that goes all the way through.
Oh, great. Okay.
So you get to select kind of like, okay, I want pranayama today and I want a strength building practice. So you get to click on those 2 sections.
Nice. And is that available yet, or it's going to be available?
It's not available yet. I'm crossing my fingers that it'll be available next year. So
okay. And who's producing it? Where is it going to be?
it's going to be, so you mean like, where is it going to be available?
Yeah.
It'll be available on my website,
Oh,
Amazon,
great.
and Amazon, both of those places. In terms of other resources, I think that the lupus.org website is one of the best ones for me. It has so much information about lupus.
And you're involved with that organization, right? Can you say something about that?
I'm involved with the Maryland, DC, Virginia chapter. So I'm part of their patient services committee, which sits, once a month and talks about how we're doing in terms of serving the lupus community. Do we have enough support groups? Where could we find more funding for this area that the community needs? Lots of involvement with the lupus walks, and almost been part of most of their seminars. So they do different summits in different parts of Virginia, DC, and I'm always at the Johns Hopkins one that happens once a year. And usually I'll do like a yoga session there or a talk on something related to lupus.
So probably people with lupus are already familiar with that organization, but some of the yoga folks might want to reach out to their local chapter and offer, a yoga session or to talk about yoga at a conference or event, right? It's a good place to connect.
Absolutely. And then hopkinslupus.org. Hopkins has the Lupus Center, which is led by Michelle Petrie, huge researcher in lupus. So that's a place to find lots of information. I mean, you're not going to probably get to ask them a lot of questions because they're very busy.
Right. But there are great articles on the site, and this is also so, as many people on the line know, I did my doctoral training at Johns Hopkins and my research in the Johns Hopkins Arthritis Center. And all of Johns Hopkins rheumatology has just some really excellent resources online, lots of articles and information for patients especially. But the information for patients can also be really helpful for integrative health practitioners.
Yeah. And then there's another website that I really like, which is lupusnewstoday.com. So
great. And Krista is putting all of these in the chat field so that people can just click right on them, which is great. And I noticed that she also put the link for International Association of Yoga Therapists, where you can find a yoga therapist. And yoga therapists, even if they don't specialize in yoga, they are so well trained. They generally have over 1,000 hours of training, and they really understand a lot about the kinds of symptoms that people with lupus experience and how to tailor a yoga practice appropriately.
Yep.
So that's a great place to start.
Yep.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. What haven't we talked about that you think is useful or important?
I want to say something about nutrition and yoga.
Sure.
Because, I think that, and I know we talked a little bit about it. We kind of like brushed through it.
Right.
But, and as yoga therapists, yoga teachers, most of us have our ideas about food and nutrition and what we should be and should not be eating. And I think it's really important not to, again, project those on other people, and not suggest that people should be eating a certain way.
Yeah.
That could be.
Which, by the way, is outside the scope of practice of a yoga teacher, right?
It is.
I mean, you can talk about a clean
yes.
diet without processed foods, but really, I mean, you're in a different case because you're a health and wellness coach, but for a yoga teacher to make specific recommendations about what somebody should be eating is really not within the profession.
And frankly, it could be dangerous.
Yeah.
Because, some nutritional supplements and some foods could be incredibly harmful to someone that's living with lupus.
And can interact with medications.
Exactly. So just, when clients will ask you questions too. Sometimes it's not even you creating these conversations, not starting them. Clients will, what do you think about this? I saw this online. And you just have to be really careful as to what you say. Yeah, this is a good thing to do. Because people are looking to you for guidance. They're looking to you a lot of times for hope. So
Right.
your word will be very powerful to a client that's, been working with you for a while, or even that has just started working with you. So we have to realize that, there's a lot of potency in what we say.
Okay, so what's a way that a yoga teacher could respond to that instead of just saying, well, I can't talk to you about nutrition, what's a way to encourage a student to find their own way in terms of a diet because especially, if your kidneys are involved, nutrition is so huge. So what kind of a response to that question would be appropriate?
I think an appropriate response is to refer that client to someone who specializes in that area, but always start with the MD, with their doctor. Because not meaning going to your doctor to talk about nutrition, that's not going to probably happen usually with most doctors. That's not what they specialize in. So why would they? Right. But bringing up to them, I'm thinking about some nutrition, what should I go to a nutritionist? Should I work with a health coach? Talking to your doctor first. Again, because like Steph said, there's medication that, there's medications that could have interactions with certain things, and your doctor should really know everything that you're doing in terms of your health and wellness. So referring to other people and talking to them, about listening to their bodies.
Yes.
When you eat certain things, check in and see how you feel after.
What do you notice? Yeah.
Notice what's happening, because that's connected to yoga. Notice what's happening when you eat certain things, and I think a good suggestion for anybody, not for just someone living with lupus, is read your labels. Right. Make sure you're not eating a bunch of chemicals and stuff. I think that's a suggestion that could be made to anyone, and I think that a lupus patient will benefit from that, obviously, from not, overloading themselves with toxic chemicals.
Sure.
So that's something you can definitely say that's not going to hurt them.
Right. Right. And I like to think about, if we talk about diet from the standpoint of ahimsa, a diet that is non-harming to yourself, others, and the planet, and so certainly whole, real food from the earth is going to be in service of ahimsa, but also, paying attention to how because what is an ahimsa diet for one person is not for another, because, sometimes we talk about a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet as being a yogic diet, but for some people that might be harmful. So you have to pay attention to what is non-harming for you. For
that person. Yeah. Right. I think that's great. Thanks for adding that. Yeah.
Well, wonderful, Lorena. I'm so happy to have had this conversation with you. What a rich conversation. Thank you so much for sharing so much from your own personal experience. I think that this is really beneficial for our audiences. And once we close out this webinar, people will also have a few links where they can reach out to you, follow you on your website, and, also for Yoga for Arthritis. So from all of us, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
And namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.